Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our convening entitled NCAA Sports in Flux, the Fate of College Athletes' Pay, Health, Safety, and Abuse, co-sponsored by the Center for Athletes' Rights and Wellbeing, the National College Players Association, REP Worldwide, Bruin Sports Business Association, and the UCLA Black Male Institute. My name is Eddie Como. I am the founder and director of the Center on Athletes' Rights and Wellbeing. I'm also a professor of higher education at UC Riverside. I'm excited to bring together a range of athletic stakeholders, current, former athletes, athlete advocates, content experts on college athletics, academics, student affairs professionals, and athletic stakeholders to really engage in the interplay of athletics and American higher education. So I'm hoping that through these spirited discussions, we can exchange ways in which we can foster new partnerships for future policy work. At present, we know that there are myriad issues, hot button issues that we're confronted with today, whether it's the latest admissions scandal that really rocked the nation. Everyone knows about Aunt Betty, right? From gender equity issues to the academic disinvestment in basketball and football players, to health and safety issues, also having to do with fair compensation with the recent passage of SB 206. So this will shape up to be a very spirited discussion that we have here today. Let me give you a sense of the format for this evening's convening. We'll have panels for 2 sessions that will have about 6 minutes to offer their perspectives, insights, knowledge. Then the moderator will attempt to engage the panelists and attempt to move the conversation forward. We'll also allow the audience to engage in this discussion. We have Sarah and Jasmine, raise your hand. We'll try to manage the questions. And so we have index cards and pins. So if you have an interest in questions to the panelists, just raise your hand, fill out the index card. We'll do our best to get to every question, but hopefully, given the time constraints, it may be difficult. And that's why we have our hashtag here, Athletes' Rights. So perhaps you can tweet a question that you might have, and I'm pretty certain that one of the panelists here will be able to respond meaningfully to your questions at some point. All right, so again, we have the hashtag here in the event that you have questions that we're not able to get to during the course of this 3-hour event. I also want to acknowledge that we did invite a number of athletic stakeholders from UCLA, from USC, from the NCAA, from the Pac-12 invitations, and they're more than welcome to attend this event. We have a number of chairs solely devoted to their representation, but we didn't get much response. But let's get started with our first panel on health and safety and abuse in college athletics. Over the past decade, health and safety issues in college sports has generated much public attention, but not enough. There has been one after another wave of health and safety issues, including abuse, mistreatment of athletes that reverberate throughout college sports. From 2000 to 2016, there were 27 deaths due to non-traumatic causes, non-contact, largely due to intense workouts. As an example, UC Berkeley, University of Maryland, admitted responsibility in conducting negligent workouts leading to the deaths of football players, Ted Agut and Jordan McNair. Ohio State team doctor Richard Strauss, who committed suicide in 2005, sexually assaulted 177 players and students from 1979 to 1996, and more than 50 members of athletic personnel knew about it. In 2018, specific to concussive injuries. Washington quarterback committed suicide and was found to have CTE. And in 2019, today, the NCAA is facing more than 300 concussive lawsuits. Lawsuits contend that the NCAA was aware of the serious short and long-term effects of head trauma, but dismissed this critical information to protect their bottom line. Many athletes reported frequent headaches, dizziness, depression, early onset of Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. Yet the NCAA denies that it has a legal duty to protect college athletes. Instead, they place the onus on member institutions to protect the health of and provide safe environments for participating athletes. Have we gone too far? Where do we draw the line? Have we normalized these behaviors and practices? Our panel is here to unpack some of these pressing issues around health and safety issues. And so let me quickly identify our panelists. They have a very impressive record. For the sake of time, I won't go through their entire bios, but I just want to at least recognize, to my immediate left, we have Chrissy Weathersby Ball, is a stunt woman, yoga instructor, accomplished gymnast, as well as a loving wife and mother of two. Chrissy trained as a competitive gymnast, beginning at an early age, culminating as a Division I NCAA gymnast with a full gymnast scholarship at Michigan State University. She earned All-American Big Ten her sophomore year and graduated with a BA in psychology. Stemming from her experience at MSU, Chrissy is one of the sister survivors and is now an advocate for victim protection, such as Title IX. For the last 17 years, Chrissy has worked alongside Hollywood's biggest names as a stunt woman. She's earned several Screen Actor Guild awards for her accomplishments. Let's welcome Chrissy Ball. Jessica Gunorin was born and raised in Greece as a daughter of Nigerian immigrants. She was raised by her mother and had two siblings that spent the majority of their time working. She came to the United States on a full scholarship to pursue her education and play college basketball. She spent 3 years at UC Riverside, 2 years in Stony Brook, 1.5 years in Virginia Commonwealth. She earned a BA in multidisciplinary studies with a concentration in Spanish, French, and political science, an MA in public policy analysis, and an MS in computer science and system security. After graduating, she spent and pursued a 3-year professional career overseas. In 2017, she was injured in Argentina. She began Find Yourself, a brand that focuses on enhancing mental health, encourages self-growth and self-love, and motivates individuals to be true selves and go after their wildest dreams. Today, Jessica flies from Virginia and takes a break from her post-surgery rehabilitation to discuss an issue that almost cost her her life. We also have Jilliana Mendiola, a California product, ended her prep career as the greatest scoring guard in California history, voted to ESPN's High School California All-Decade Team. She's a former Pac-10 Conference Player of the Year and a 2004 John Wooden National Player of the Year finalist. She ended her career as the only player in Pac-10 history to score over 1,500 points, over 700 rebounds, and more than 600 assists. Mendiola was a 2-time Associated Press and Kodak Honorable Mention All-American in 2003 and 2004, and was inducted into the Washington Hall of Fame in October of 2012. I can go on and on and on about this impressive record. We also have Rachel Devaka, is a cosmetologist, business owner, and rights for advocates. Being a combat veteran's wife and a former NCAA collegiate athlete's mom, has opened her eyes to the mistreatment of those closest to her. It was then her son, a former UC San Diego baseball player, suffered a traumatic brain injury that she was inspired to advocate for the health, safety, protecting the well-being of athletes at all levels of competition. Rachel takes pride in advocating for things that are important to her and seeks to inspire others to find their voice as well. We also have Haley Hodson, is an advocate, filmmaker, and former Stanford University volleyball player, currently pursuing a JD at UCLA School of Law. Hodson completed both the women's indoor and beach volleyball teams at Stanford before having a medically retired after a series of concussions. After former USA Women's National Team, ABCA National Freshman of the Year, and a collegiate All-American, Hodson is a fierce advocate for college athletes. She is passionate about issues such as gender equity in sports and entertainment, brain injury and mental health and awareness, health and safety, best practices in college sport. Hodson testifies in California State Legislature in support of Senate Bill 206 and has been featured discussing athletes' rights on Vice News, The Today Show, and NBC Nightly News. We also have Patrick Scott, a filmmaker, serves as a faculty at Loyola Marymount University and received his master's degree from California Institute of the Arts. Patrick creates original work for companies like Viceland Discovery, Dollar Shave Club. His films have premiered at Sundance and has over 200 million views worldwide. And finally, we have Ramogi Uma, a former UCLA football player and founder and executive director of the National College Players Association, which is a co-sponsor of SB 206. He is actively working with lawmakers in U.S. Congress and numerous states to pass similar legislation to allow college athletes compensation for their name, image, and likeness. He has assisted numerous athletes in dealing with deception, unfair, and abusive practices on campuses, and advocates for the enforcement of health and safety standards in college athletics. Uma earned his BA in sociology and a master's of public health at UCLA. Let's give a warm welcome for our panelists.
Can you guys hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And it was incredibly difficult. My voice is shaking right now, not because I'm sitting here talking to you all, but because this is incredibly difficult to talk about. I don't think any one of us want to be here. And I think as an athlete, the way we're trained and the way we think is that if we can't handle it, we're weak. So that's where I'm coming from as I read my statement, because that would be the only way I would be able to stick to 6 minutes. So I was recruited to be a scholarship athlete on the Michigan State gymnastics team. After accepting my scholarship my senior year in high school, I tore my ACL. So when I stepped foot on MSU's campus, I was injured and started receiving medical treatment from Larry Nassar immediately. Larry was in complete control of our medical care, including annual physicals, decisions about return to play, and recommendations for surgery, recovery, and training. Pretty much all of the above. Many people on our team, including myself, would see him almost daily. When the case of Dr. Nassar came to light, many of us realized that there were multiple treatments that he performed that were actually sexual assault that we did not know were sexual assault. Over time, the coaches and medical staff broke me physically, mentally, and spiritually. I wasn't used to being told to work through being severely injured, and I felt so unhappy, or I thought I wasn't happy, that I ended up calling the head coach of another university that had originally offered me a full scholarship to ask to transfer. And he told me that I would lose my entire scholarship and a year of eligibility if I transferred. So if I wanted to continue as a full scholarship athlete, I felt at that time of being a teenager, I had to stay in the environment that I was in. During that time, my strength and conditioning coach, who was also one of my professors, was grooming me when I was a freshman, and ultimately I became a victim of sexual abuse by him while I was a student athlete. Throughout my entire time at Michigan State, I was in pain every single day, but of course I thought it was my fault because in our handbook, we were told that it was our responsibility. I suffered a terribly broken leg due to the decisions of Larry Nassar and head trainer Destiny Hawk at that time, who had complete control over how I trained and when I were to train when I was injured. During the 2 years I competed, I had 3 knee surgeries within 12 months, as well as the severely broken leg that stayed broken for 9 months. Again, I was training and competing during this time. I have had to endure a total of 9 surgeries post-MSU, most of which were performed by Dr. Dietzel, who is still the head of the orthopedics at Michigan State University and was Larry Nassar's supervisor. I have experienced severe mental and emotional distress directly related to my contact with the strength coach, who is on paid leave currently, due to my Title IX case that I have had going on for 410 days. As well as, sorry for that side note, but, and as well as MSU staff, resulting in countless medications and counseling appointments while I attended for all 4 years. Again, I was sexually assaulted by my doctor, and I was sexually abused by my coach. There are at least 5 people that were mentioned in the federal Cleary report that still work at Michigan State University. 1 year after leaving MSU, I began to suffer from ovarian issues basically right away, none of which are genetic or hereditary and have been linked with sexual trauma. I have endured severe abdominal pain, cysts, and endometriosis. I've had 4 painful ovarian surgeries, resulting in the removal of one of my ovaries, and most likely, I'm needing a hysterectomy in the next few years. I have miscarried 3 children. I literally broke my knee when I was walking up the stairs to get diapers for my daughter last summer. I am not able to run, jump, or participate in high activities with my children without being in severe pain. My knee will probably have to be replaced in the next 1 to 3 years. I've also struggled with severe eating issues for 13 years after I left MSU. They did become so severe at one point that they almost killed me. So I'm here today not only to share my story, and I apologize for my voice shaking, but I really have never shared that many details with anyone. That we don't only suffer abuse while we're in school, but it is lifelong lasting. I will be in pain for the rest of my life for the decisions and inaction of the medical staff and coaches that I had to deal with while I was at MSU.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and to be part of this action that is meant to initiate change and bring awareness to an issue that has been overlooked and has been taken lightly. I do not enjoy talking about myself, but in order for me to show you guys how important it is for changes to happen right now, I have to share my story and my experience. So I come from a travel. Before that, I need for you guys to keep this in mind, this phrase, more than a number. I need you to think of more than a number the entire time. So I come from a troubled background. My dad left my mom when I was 3 months old. He left her with 3 kids in a foreign country, no help. She didn't know anyone. I dealt with sexual abuse and sexual harassment for 11 years of my life, starting at the age of 6. So for me, when basketball came into my life at the age of 16, it was my escape. It was my way to stay away from home, where I dealt with sexual harassment, and it was my way to stay out of trouble being born in the hood. So when the National Letter of Intent came, which I signed on my own, both my part and my mother's part, it wasn't just an opportunity for me to play basketball and study in the highest level. It was my key to freedom. It was my escape from a reality that I was debating every day if I wanted to continue to live in. So when I went to UC Riverside in 2010, and I spent 3 years of my life there, and I went there because my coach at that point was Greek American. So I thought that by going to that school, I would overcome the barrier, the language barrier. So when I went there, I expected to be guided by someone that knew where I was coming from, that knew what I had been through, because I was always a high-risk student in high school. And instead of my process of integrating to the culture being facilitated, I had to deal with daily mental abuse. Instead of listening, instead of hearing, it's gonna be okay, every time I had a turnover or a missed shot in practice, I would hear things like, you're gonna lose your scholarship, or you deserve being abandoned by your father, or it seems to me that you wanna go back to the situations where you were sexually harassed at your home. When you come from a background like mine, you don't realize that failure is not final. Failure only happens when you stop trying. So when he told me that he was gonna take my scholarship away from me, I'm thinking to myself, if I lose this scholarship, that's it for me. I failed, I have to go back. And when you come from a background like mine, you don't know self-worth. You don't know that moving on, transferring is part of the journey of being successful. You think that transferring is giving up because all you're used to is going through situations and pushing through them. Every single year that I spent in UC Riverside, I debated transferring, and I didn't. My third year, I suffered from a series of concussions, and I was pushed to come back early after every concussion, and I lied about my symptoms. The third time, I remember in practice, I felt out of it, and I just sat in a corner at the end of practice thinking that, when is this gonna end? I went home and I woke up the next day and I started stuttering. I started trembling. I had no control over my breathing. I started hyperventilating. And with the health insurance that I had, I wasn't able to see a neurologist for another 6 months. So I was prescribed to narcotics. I woke up, I took my pills, I ate, and I went back to sleep 3 to 4 times a day. At one point, I wasn't able to carry the daily activities, so I needed help. And then it came to me to start a fundraiser for my mother to come because we didn't have the funds for her to come. I started on a Friday. I had the money by Sunday, and on Sunday, I received a call from the head coach saying, "You are a disgrace to the school. You have let the athletic director down, you have let your teammates down, you have let me down, and it was a mistake for me to bring you to the country." And this was because the fundraiser was an NCAA violation. So me and him had to meet the following day, that Monday. And from the moment that I hung up till our meeting, I thought to myself, this is it. I'm going home, I'm losing my scholarship. I met with him the next day, and he repeated everything I just told you, but he also said that he had a friend who suffered from the same symptoms and ended up driving himself crazy and ended up in a madhouse, a behavioral center. And if I was to continue to create the symptoms to myself, that's where I would end up too. So I overdosed on all the narcotics they prescribed to me. I emptied every bottle of pills that was available in the apartment. I share this with you because I'm here. And the fact that I'm here is a miracle, and I know my purpose. I share this with you for you to understand that when kids go to college at the age of 18, they don't need someone that's gonna remind them or target them based on what they've been through. It's their escape. There are student athletes right now that see their sport as their escape. And instead of being guided and being told that, you know what, you deserve this, you earned this, you deserve to be here, they're being told that they're not worth anything. They're being threatened with their scholarships. This has to stop. And why did I say, remember the phrase, more than a number? Because when you come from a troubled background, all you think about is a number. Your grades, how much money you have, your stats, and you hope that at the end of every game, they remember the number on your jersey. I'm here because we need to make sure that not only that the people that are assigned to these roles to direct the students are aware of mental health, but we also need to make sure that student athletes know that their value is not dependent on a number. It's a person with feelings. So as I sit here and student athletes are in schools and you're sitting right there, I just want you to understand that you're more than what you make, you're more than your GPA, you're more than what's in your pockets. We need to understand that we're people, and change needs to come right now.
Hello. My perspective's coming from, I was an athlete once, but I was also an assistant coach for 8 years. So it's been a little bit difficult listening to her story because I actually coached her for 1 year. And I walked into a situation where I didn't know what was going on, and all I was told was she had mental health issues. I wasn't told that she was being abused. The head coach was saying all these things to her, and that was the reason why she actually attempted suicide. So to listen to her story, and we've talked a lot already, is very difficult. I want to thank Mr. Huma and NAACP for having me, because I believe strongly in prioritizing the health and safety of our student athletes. I sit here without a job today. I was an assistant coach for UC Riverside for 7 years. They tried to silence me for the past 7 years and after terminating me, but I sit here today. I will not be silenced. I need to stand up for the student athletes because people like Jessica right here need people like me to let people know what's going on. I come from a strong, supportive family. I've learned that in life you don't always get what you deserve, but you do, or you can get what you fight for. So I'm here fighting for not just my character, my reputation, my future, but I'm here to fight for the student athletes that need protection. Protection from abuse, whether it be physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Protection from the culture of fear and intimidation that is created to force the abuse to be silenced. Protection from a culture that allows people in positions of power to not be held accountable for their actions or inaction. Protection against the failure and oversight by the athletic department or administrators in the university that perpetuates the abuse. This is why it keeps happening, is because we don't put a stop, not just to the abuser, but also to the enablers that allow it to continue to happen. I am a woman of high moral character and integrity. I've worked hard, earning the love and respect of the basketball community in the 19 years of Division I or higher experience that I have. My toughness, work ethic, and leadership is what has established my legacy both on and off the court. When I decided to coach following my professional basketball career, I understood that to be a coach is not just you're a coach. You're a teacher, you're a mentor, you're a role model, and I take that to heart. When I played at the University of Washington, they challenged and pushed me without humiliating me. I've been fortunate to have mentors who helped build me up rather than break me down. As an assistant coach at UC Riverside, I was witness to the contrary. In these cases, the problem of abuse does not just lie with the abuser, but the enablers as well. What's the use of getting rid of the rotten apple when the worms still remain? Athletic Director Tamika Smith-Jones was aware of Coach Margarita's actions and failed to prevent the harassment, discrimination, and retaliation not only against me, but against the student athletes. She failed them. My time at UCR was rewarding, but at times very difficult. For the 7 years under Coach Mark, I witnessed toxic, demeaning, hostile, misogynistic culture that he created with his verbal and emotional abuse. I'm also a victim of it as well. Some of the abuse against me is that he threatened my job and future several times simply because I resisted his verbal attacks, harassment, and discrimination. He threatened my job when I would stand up against his mistreatment of the student athletes. He threatened not to renew my contract unless I sign a paper saying that I won't get pregnant again. after 2 pregnancies and 3 children later. He created an overall hostile work environment simply because I wouldn't have it. I was not okay with how he treated people, period. You heard her testimony, and I've also talked and witnessed other situations where Coach Mark mentally abused student athletes, threatened their scholarships, discriminated against them, discriminated against African Americans because of their particular hairstyle, he felt like it affected the way they played. He abused her and it caused her to attempt suicide. He tried to rush a student athlete back from C-section in 2 to 4 weeks instead of the recommended time that the doctor obviously, recommended. He disapproved of student athletes because of their sexual orientation or image and limited their playing time because he felt it wasn't a good representation of the team. He continued to threaten scholarships, and he threatened your scholarships if you didn't submit to his demands. He pressured players back from injury sooner than the doctors recommended. He belittled, body shamed, and blamed student athletes for their injuries in private and in front of the team. Overall, this whole situation, I spoke with human resources at some point. They did nothing. Senior Women's Administrator Michael Boley knew of the abuse and she did nothing. Athletic Director Tamika Smith-Jones knew and failed in her initial investigation and failed to take appropriate and timely action. I tried to speak with Chancellor Kim Wilcox, but he refused a meeting. He failed to investigate the abuse of student athletes, as well as investigating Tamika Smith-Jones for her lack of oversight. At UCR, the complaints the student athletes came forward with was not an isolated incident. It showed a pattern of abuse that spanned 15 years of Coach Margarita's tenure at UC Riverside. When there's a pattern of abuse, it becomes a responsibility of the athletic director to protect the student athletes, and she failed in doing so. Had I not been terminated, alumni would not have come forward with their testimonies of abuse. Had the alumni not come forward with their testimonies of abuse in the media, Coach Margaritas would still be coaching and the abuse would have still continued. The primary focus should not be to protect the image of the university, but to protect the character of the university. What makes up the character of the student athletes? That should be priority number 1. It is the university's athletic department's legal obligation to prevent and protect student athletes. More importantly, as mentors, it is our moral obligation to protect student athletes. As adults, we can do better, and we should do better because the student athletes are depending on us. Thank you.
How many of you have a mother? How many of you are a mother? I am the mother of a college athlete who was injured with a traumatic brain injury. And I would like to share with you what happens after the cheering stops. UCSD recruited my son Joe the summer before his senior year. Joe is a 6'6" first baseman, big hitter, and a scholar athlete. He was living the baseball dream, and so it began. Joe's first college quarter, he would tell us it was a grind. Second quarter, he called us to tell us he was getting a Scholar Athlete Award. Joe was honored with 14 other UCSD Scholar athletes, and his team showed up to support him. It was a very proud moment. Third quarter, I'm at work and I get a text from Joe with a swollen face selfie telling us he just got a concussion. His phone went silent. We did not know who to contact, wondering if the athletic trainers would call us. We knew the UCSD hospital was across the street from the stadium. We finally got a return call from Joe. He had driven his car back to the dorm, and the athletic trainer told him if his headache gets worse or if he vomits, to give him a call. I said, "Joe, no hospital, no CAT scan?" Joe reassured me. He thought the athletic trainers were taking care of him. He believed he had to do what they told him to do. At that time, we did not realize this was the beginning of the end of Joe's baseball career. We also didn't know the athletic trainers were unlicensed, not regulated, and did not require a medical license in the state of California. UCSD only requires their trainers to have a certificate from the state of Nebraska. Joe took 2 batted balls to his head and face during pregame warm-ups, minutes apart from each other. Blood came gushing from his mouth. He went to the athletic trainer and he gave Joe a gauze. Joe headed over to the batting cages to finish warming up. He tried hitting balls, but he kept missing. His vision was blurred and he was dizzy. He went back to the trainers, they assessed him, and they determined he was concussed. 7 days later, after the initial injury, the athletic trainer finally set up an appointment for Joe to see the UCSD sports doctor. The UCSD sports doctor declared that Joe was still symptomatic and told the athletic trainer to get him ready to return to play once he was asymptomatic. Joe never saw that UCSD doctor again. Soon after, the athletic trainer returned Joe to play. He never arranged help for Joe's academics through the school's disability department, and Joe's grades started to slip. Joe eventually was sent off to play summer ball. He played hard and represented UCSD well. We did not know at the time that he was suffering from post-concussion syndrome, headaches, fatigue, depression, and he was very irritable. He didn't look injured. He didn't play like he was injured, but his brain was still bruised. He returned to school, and during his physical, he had high blood pressure. The athletic trainer allowed him to participate in the hardcore make-you-break-you workouts. It took Joe about 2 weeks before he finally broke. He had enough. He was done with baseball. Joe said it was a brutal environment. He refused to be recognized as an athlete anymore. Joe's post-concussion symptoms were fueled by the hardcore workouts. This was 7 months later, and his brain was screaming for help. My motherly instincts kicked in with respect to the UCSD sports doctors. I asked them, why did you not protect Joe's well-being? You did not follow concussion management protocols. Why was my son never referred to the UCSD concussion clinic? If Joe had broken his leg, I am sure you would have never released him to the coach. Joe has a traumatic brain injury, and because it is invisible, UCSD did nothing. The NCAA protocols and the UCSD concussion management policy require that an impact cognitive test has to be given to an athlete prior to returning to play. It also requires a licensed physician to give a medical release. UCSD neglected to do both. The impact test was given to Joe 7 months too late. An untreated traumatic brain injury can result in prolonged symptoms. We discovered that the UCSD baseball program did not set a good example for concussion management protocols. The NCAA does not enforce health and safety policies. I called the NCAA legislative department. They told me they would take my complaint. They also told me I would never hear back from them. I truly believe we need a health and safety bill to protect the well-being of every athlete. Athletes only have one brain. Who would have ever thought a concussion would be an invisible traumatic brain injury. After the cheering stops, this mother will advocate for all athletes. Will you? Thank you for this opportunity.
Wow. Okay. All right. I'm so incredibly honored to be here, and I mean here in so many ways. I decided to sort of wait to hear what other people had to say this afternoon before deciding what parts of my story I would tell. And coming on the tails of this story, I mean, actually, like verbatim, if you just put in my name and put in Stanford University, that was my story. Except I didn't have a baseline test. And so that when the interim athletic trainer that was covering for another trainer on maternity leave, and who knows who had licenses and who didn't, and all of that, and I think she was this poor graduate student trainee, had like 7 teams she was responsible for, so these are hundreds of athletes on a daily basis. So when she pulled out the impact test, and I'd just been hit in practice, and I didn't have a baseline test, which is the whole point of the system and the protocols to begin with, it was just guesswork. And it was comparing me against a national average, and it was my 3rd documented concussion, which science says that's red flag. Number 3 is red flag zone. And they knew that. And what happened after that was not probably wasn't what should have happened. And the recurring pattern amongst all of these stories is that when you arrive at a school, at a college, and you are trained to be there, you have earned your right to be there, you are at the top of your game, and you know your body, and you know in some sense that you've signed up to do a hard thing. What you don't expect is a complete betrayal of the trust you've put in a lifetime of hard work. I have had Olympic dreams since pretty much the day I was born. My family went to the Salt Lake Olympics in 2001, and you guys can't see right now, I'm now 6'2", my dad's 6'8". It was pretty obvious from infancy that I was going to be giant. But at these Winter Olympics, I wanted nothing more than to be an Olympic figure skater. That really didn't work out. That was not a dream that came to pass. But what did stick was the Olympic part, the Olympic dream. I played every sport as a kid, and I remember when I was playing softball at age 8 or so, and that was the year they took softball out of the Olympics. And I looked at my parents, I said, okay, when this season is over, it's just gonna be volleyball and soccer, because why play softball if it's not the Olympics? And that was me at 8 years old. I wanted to be in that arena. I wanted to have those opportunities. And as a little kid, it probably felt like a pipe dream, and people probably thought I was a little crazy saying those things. But as time came to pass, I made my first USA volleyball team at 13, and I started getting recruiting letters. I went on my first college recruiting trip at 13, and ironically, it was here. I set foot on this campus at 13 years old. I was in 8th grade. I wasn't even in high school. And that was sort of the beginning of this reality that, oh, wait, this dream I've had, it's possible. And for the next 5 years, I made more and more USA teams. I left high school and finished online in order to train with the US women's national team. I competed with women that were 17 years older than me. I trained with our Olympic coach. And so when I was recruited and went to Stanford, I was there in order to give everything I had to my team, but I was in it for the long run. I had hopes and dreams of an Olympic career and future and a professional career that was very, very real and very tangible. And my coaches knew that, and everyone that had ever coached me knew that. And so when I went through my recruiting process, I asked a lot of questions. My family asked a lot of questions. We asked health and safety questions. We looked at coaches when I was 14, 15, 16 on recruiting trips and said, my parents would ask, if you notice my daughter is starting not to be herself, if mental health issues come up, we know college is stressful, we know sports are stressful, she has no history, what are you gonna do? Not that there's a precedence for this, there's nothing that's of concern to us now, but if something happens, are you gonna take care of her? And there were programs that we knew to avoid, and there were programs that we had coaches look us in the eye and say, we're gonna take care of your daughter. And that's not what happened. And so there is, I'm really concerned by the fact that you can be the #1 recruit, you can be an All-American, and you can go to a school like Stanford that is well-funded in the public eye and in a sport that is incredibly well-funded and is more popular as a woman than its male counterpart. That's very rare. And that if these sort of things can happen when all the pieces are in place for things to go right, what on earth is happening in every situation that is not the best case scenario? Because what's happening at the best case scenario schools is terrifying. We see things like sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse. Some of the practices that coaches run, you have people dying on fields, yes, but there's other types of physical abuse practices that run long over, and they ask you to lie when you report to the NCAA how many hours of practices you have each week. And that is mental, that is physical, it's emotional. And I haven't even begun to deal with the trauma of it all. I'm fresh out of college, I graduated last year, and now I'm in law school because this stuff irks me to my core. I have to do something about this. And there are far too many people that are so terrified, and rightfully so, of speaking up. And so that's why I'm here. I think that's why we're all here, is that there are very few of us willing to pay the price for saying this is what happened, this is what is continuing to happen, and we need to do whatever we can to be a voice for those that don't have the courage or the resources or really the strength to speak up. It's not that they don't want to, it's that pretty much they can't.
A few years ago, I was a commercial director with my own production company in Venice Beach. Coming from foster care, making a career out of my passion was all I ever wanted. And so when I was asked to teach filmmaking at a nearby university, I was surprised that I could have other passions as well. I teach at Loyola Marymount University, and even though I've never had time to teach more than 1 or 2 classes a week, teaching has made me a better person, and my students have become my family. Around 3 years ago, a student of mine told me she was being abused by her coach. My student was from overseas, she came from nothing, and was worried that she would lose her scholarship. I told her the evidence was so bad that she would be protected, and she asked me to come with her to file the report. The first sign that something was wrong was a stalling from HR. Over several emails and several days, while my student was forced to face her abuser, we were asked if we really wanted to file a complaint. Seeing this, I spoke to my supervisor within the School of Film and Television, who questioned my student's honesty and accused me of having a savior complex. Worse, I was told that by advocating for my student, I was doing her a disservice because she needed to learn to fend for herself. At last, HR filed the complaint, and my student and I thought the ordeal was over. That is, until I received messages from a half dozen other student athletes, all who had abuse stories of their own. Looking back, I'm ashamed to admit that my reaction to these new allegations was disbelief. If the problem was so big, how could it have been going on for so long? Since these new students weren't in my department, I went to some of their professors. And I can't say that I was surprised by their disbelief because I had had the same reaction. I wasn't even surprised by all the faculty who told me that they wouldn't do anything to help because they were afraid of losing their jobs. What I was surprised by was their anger. The anger that I was bringing this to their attention, the anger that I wasn't going through proper channels, and I think really their anger at themselves for hiding from the problem. Loyola Marymount University markets itself in its commitment to social justice. I'm not a documentary filmmaker, but I have access to filmmaking equipment. And so in responses to accusations that I was exaggerating, I started recording everything. I was warned that I would lose my job, or as they say in higher education, that I wouldn't be rehired. But I had filmmaking career to fall back on, and given my upbringing, I was sure that I could deal with hard times. I'm embarrassed now by my arrogance. Before long, I was contacted not just by athletes, but former coaches who corroborated the students' every word. But while the evidence grew solid, I fell apart. I had no preparation to deal with the stories of sexual coercion, debilitating injuries, attempted suicide, and death. I also never expected to get calls from students who didn't even go to my school, but attended other universities and programs I'd never even heard of: USC, Stanford, UC Riverside, UC Irvine, dozens of other schools, including right here at UCLA. What tied all these students together was their pathetic underground railroad of abusive coaches who are shuffled from team to team without accountability. Remarkably, even though I made it clear that I was gathering evidence, the school administrators continued to be brazen in their corruption and neglect. My student scholarship was threatened, my job was threatened, and I was asked point blank if the reason I cared so much is because I was secretly sleeping with my students. I was not. I never had much respect for sports until meeting these athletes. But I've learned that their sport is what filmmaking is to me. It's the passion that gives them power. And so I used my power to cut together some of the evidence I'd gathered into a trailer for a documentary. I uploaded it and sent the link to every administrator I could think of in the school. I have to give the HR team credit, because in all of my evidence gathering and preparing, I never expected them to respond to my video by implying that I had been keeping all of this secret and was failing in my duties as a mandatory reporter. Despite this formal reaction, a wave of early retirements were announced with the release of my trailer. A coach was fired, an athletic director was gone, and most importantly, my student graduated. I'm so proud of her. But the higher-ups and the many of the people who knew of the problem and did nothing still remain. The flawed system still remains, and the wounds and trauma and the unheard voices hang over all of us, and they are our shame. You're going to hear a lot about how complex this issue is and how many nuances there are. And like me, you may find yourself struggling to explain why faculty aren't standing up and why administrators are ignoring the problem. You may find it hard to explain to students why they were forced to play when injured or why their abuser wasn't punished. But take it from a teacher that the answer is simple. It's about money. And this is our higher education.
First, I'd like to just thank everyone for demonstrating real courage. This is what it looks like. I know none of this is easy for the people up here, but thankfully it's a chance to expose what's going on. And I really want to focus on ideas for change, for solutions. You see the problem. And the question is why does this happen? Why does this happen? And essentially, it's a conflict of interest. This was seen in the statement published by Six Medical Association. It's called the 2013 Team Physician Statement. And it stated that those with professional gain, monetary gain in sight, can put college athletes and their well-being at risk. They have a conflict of interest. For coaches, you're seeing coaches who live and die with wins. So they're pushing players who are severely injured back into competition. You're seeing athletic trainers who want to keep their jobs, bow to the coach's wishes. You're seeing the universities themselves. The last thing they want is for these people to talk and feel comfortable exposing what's going on, exposing the scandals, the mistreatment, the negligence. And they don't want that being on the reputation, and they don't want the liability. So instead of trying to clean up, they act to cover up, and that's a problem. One of the questions is, well, is this really a problem everywhere? Is this just isolated incidents here and there? Absolutely not. And I think the most compelling evidence is the NCAA's own survey, just on concussions alone. Their own survey of athletic trainers in Division I found that 50% of athletic trainers in Division I admit to returning players with concussion symptoms back to the same game. 50%. The National Athletic Trainers Association did their own survey of their trainers and found that about 50% of these trainers say that they're pressured to do so by the coaches. What does a coach have any business meddling in medical decisions in the first place? None. But this conflict of interest is powerful. It was mentioned in the opening statements by Professor Cuomo. Ohio State, 177 students and athletes sexually assaulted. 50 members of the athletic staff knew. And this went on for decades and decades. Conflict of interest in action. Conflict of interest that shaped each one of their experiences, unfortunately. You look at, these big picture pieces of information, but just this year alone, headlines of mistreatment and negligence are in the papers. Right here at UCLA, a few months ago, there were 3 football players suing the school now and their former coach, Jim Mora, for allegations of misconduct, forcing them back in with serious injuries. One of them had traumatic brain injury, fell into depression and attempted suicide. These are big issues. Women's soccer at the University of Houston, Nebraska softball players, Rutgers softball players. It's gonna go on and on with no end in sight. When you look at solutions, don't look to the NCAA. NCAA sports is a predatory industry. They facilitate all of this. They give cover to the schools. The schools themselves vote on the rules or lack thereof. The health and safety standards that are not being enforced, that decision was made collectively by schools who themselves are the perpetrators, the schools and the staff. That's who we're talking about here. The perpetrators as individuals and the administrators covering this all up. It's not an oversight. This is by design. So you can't look to the schools to correct the situation. They want to cover it up. At the end of the day, the NCAA calls this self-policing. Self-policing, you don't give the perpetrators, you don't give a criminal a badge. It's not going to work. It's not going to work, unfortunately. For our bit, we see legislation as a solution. College athletes need a third party independent of the colleges, a third party independent of the NCAA that has the power to intervene. We actually sponsored a bill in 2017 and 18 here in California to hopefully set a model for health and safety. And it would have charged the schools a very nominal fee to establish a state program that would have identified best practices and enforced them. It would also be a place for athletes to go, or for anyone to go, when there was a suspected violation. We're going to try again this year. It actually passed the Assembly overwhelmingly. We were shocked when the Senate Education Committee refused to support it. That's where the bill died. But we're going to go after it again this year in hopes that we can convince them to do the right thing, as well as the Senate Appropriations Committee. So we're very hopeful that in the near future, by this time next year, hopefully California athletes have protections and a model that we can extend to other states, possibly even Congress. Parts of the legislation that are very important, number one, you gotta have whistleblower protections. Time and time again, we're talking about, this is very difficult to even digest as a player, much less to blow a whistle, to say, hey, something's wrong. And if there's gonna be retaliation, you can better believe we're gonna find another scandal with decades of victims. So we have to guarantee that faculty, coaches, players, anybody on campus is immune from retaliation. We also need mandated reporting. Again, many of these stories here, it's not that there's one perpetrator and no one else knows. Usually someone else knows. There's usually witnesses. My wife is a preschool director. If she suspects a violation, by law, she must report, and there must be an investigation. Obviously, there's a compelling need here in this area as well. The program needs to be able to remove offenders. If you have a minor violation, maybe you're retrained, maybe you're suspended. If you're a major violator, you should be gone from college athletics, period. Many of these offending people or negligent people are circulated. It's cyclical. There was a death at Central Florida, 2008. Player had sickle cell, negligence, okay? The athletic trainer who oversaw that workout was hired at UC Berkeley, okay? 2014, a player with sickle cell under his watch died. UC Berkeley also admitted negligence. Where's that trainer now? I have no idea. Probably somewhere, maybe in college athletics. So we need to be able to address these things. And also importantly, we have to empower the players. The players have to know where they can go, what resources do they have at their disposal. And there needs to be a proactive effort to educate them once that program's in place. But we definitely see there are solutions. It's not just headlines that we should be focusing on the carnage, which is very important, but we need to implement solutions.
Thank you, panelists. We have about 7 or 8 minutes so that you can field some questions relative to your stories. But before I begin, I think it's important to say I am deeply sorry that the system continues to fail you over and over and over again. Your voices are powerful, and I encourage you to continue to use your voices on your terms, right? You know, as we think about the lack of mechanisms and tools in place, when we're thinking about the mistreatment of athletes from abuse, assault, Chrissy, can you talk a little bit about, given your powerful story, what recommendations might you have for athletes that are experiencing similar issues, whether it's mental health issues, abuse, assault, given the lack of sort of transparency in the ways in which we sort of intervene at this level?
Well, if I would, okay, guys, hear me? Okay. If I were going to give advice to another student athlete that would be experiencing abuse, I think that they need to find somebody that they trust. And I say that even with some reservation, because when I was in that situation, there were a lot of people that I did trust that I realized were now perpetrators. So I think that really it's a systemic thing, that there has to be education for athletes, number one, to even know what abuse is, to recognize that they are being mistreated by something that's outside of them, and it's not them. They're not the problem. I think that I believed it literally for over 2 decades that I was the problem. I just couldn't handle it. Like, I just thought I just can't handle this for some reason. So I think that we need to continue to educate them and provide resources outside of their networks, a third party. It cannot necessarily even be a family member, because some people don't have families to go to. I mean, some people's families sell them out to be this amazing star of an athlete. So I think that we need to provide those resources for them. And if they ask and they don't get help, even if they're not sure what that help should look like, then maybe ask again. Because for me, when I reached out to the other coach to transfer and he asked, hey, Chrissy, what's going on? I was like, I'm just not happy. I didn't really have the words to say, I'm being mistreated. So again, if we can give them language and give them education so that they know how to recognize, my time is out.
Same question for Jessica.
Hello. Same question for me. I think that it's important for a program to be established for incoming freshmen. I think it's important for a separation to happen between what the sport means to the student athlete. So realizing that your sport cannot be your way of dealing with mental issues or problems that came before college. Because, for example, in my case, I was listening to your story. You had support from your family. I didn't go, when I went to UC Riverside, it was my first time in the United States. I didn't know I could visit other schools. So that was my first time, a freshman. So I think it's important to establish a program that brings awareness for the student athlete and lets the student athlete know that, you're here now, you've earned this. What are you bringing with you? What's your baggage? Your sport cannot be your escape. You have to deal with whatever it is that has scarred you, whatever it is that has held you back or made you who you are and gave you the strength to be who you are. A program needs to be established, because I had a conversation with an assistant coach recently that had a student athlete attempt suicide. And what she told me was the coaches it's not their expertise to know what to do with a student athlete that's suffering from mental health issues. So there needs to be something, a program that takes care of that component of a student athlete. Because for some of us, just hearing you need counseling, it's not it. You come from certain backgrounds where counseling is seen as, So instead of trying to train student athletes for 3 hours where they're broken down. You can train them for 2.5 hours. You can pick on them and spend 30 minutes building them up with a program that tells them you deserve to be here. That's my.
Thank you. So there are some clear vulnerabilities within the system, and everyone up here is doing advocacy work to certainly address the well-being of athletes. Ramogi, you talked about the bill that you put forward. You talked about protection for whistleblowers. You talk about a need for mandated reporting. As you present things that seem to be reasonable, right, in terms of addressing these vulnerabilities, what has been the response from the NCAA and member institutions with respect to some of the things that you've put forward that seem to be reasonable?
I'm glad you asked that question. I failed to mention that when our bill was up, every school in the state opposed it. Every school. Schools that had killed players in hazardous workouts, schools that had abused players and it hit the headlines, no shame whatsoever. I think part of this panel right here is to bring these things into light. And you mentioned at the beginning, unfortunately, and we fight hard also for player compensation in other areas, but it seems like player compensation snatches all the headlines. When a player dies here and there, there'll be a headline for a day, nothing on the solution. So the problem with that is that there's less political pressure. There's less, exposure. When a lawmaker's voting, they're kind of voting in secret if nobody's paying attention. So we need them to pay attention. The schools are extremely powerful. I was in Congress lobbying in, I think it was February, on health and safety. And I mentioned how frustrating it was to go up against the schools. And multiple offices said that people think, big pharma, big oil has the most lobbying power. They said, no, it's the schools. It's the schools. The schools killed that bill. Make no mistake about it. So every school will oppose the bill again. But guess what? They also opposed our player compensation bill. That passed. So we're hoping that the second go around, and we're gonna keep at it. The state will pass this bill one way or another. If it's not this upcoming year, it's gonna happen because you have courageous people stepping up. But the schools oppose it. The NCAA is not even pretending that they're enforcing God. They're not even pretending. They don't want any part of it. Lawsuits, they're looking straight at the judge saying that's not our problem. This was an organization that was established to protect college athletes when football players were dying. The president said, protect them or we're pulling the plug on football. They came together to implement health and safety standards. And today, they care more about a basketball tournament than the players in those tournaments. The players in those tournaments, they can die on national television. There won't be an NCAA investigation. But should one of those players so much as get a bag of groceries for free, they'll come in and investigate. They'll punish them. So there's a big problem in the sports.
And Patrick, Haley, Rachel, Juliana, any advocacy work that you'd like to share with us for the sake of time? If we can get a lightning round where you maybe 1 minute, share some things that you're doing to sort of address issues around mental health abuse with respect to college athletics.
Just real quick, I've been with Ramogi a couple times up in the Capitol here in California, and he's not joking. Like, there's a line of lobbyists from all of these schools that stand there and resoundingly say no as forcefully as possible to every single effort. And the response from most of our representatives, this is the good part of the story, they usually turn around and ask why. Because they're always, the fine tuning, like what's the cost? How do we do it? All of the policy, putting things in place. It's a challenge. It's a project, and that's fine. But most of our representatives are really catching on to the moral and ethical reasons behind these proposed pieces of legislation. It's why the Compensation Act, SB 206, got through. It's because they were looking at the schools and the people lobbying against these bills, and they had no moral answer for why they were saying what they were saying. It was just about power and money. That was their response. That was the run-of-the-mill response, and this whole big question mark of, well, we have to figure out a new solution. And that's exactly right. Like, progress is change, and that's a process. It's difficult. It's not easy, but it's absolutely worthwhile. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I was actually terminated 4 months ago from UC Riverside because that fact that I advocated for the well-being of student athletes. when you have an athletic director that empowers the abuser to turn around and terminate the coach that's advocating for the well-being, that's where the problem lies. What I've done since then is just continue to use my voice, because really that's what I have right now. It's difficult because I am unemployed. It might push universities away because I'm advocating so much for our student athletes. But at the same time, it's hard for me. It's to hear stories like Jessica's and people up here and not fight for them. It's just, to me, it's just not right. So I'm going to continue to use my voice. Whatever the NACP wants me to participate in, I'm all in, because I really believe there needs to be change. And obviously, like I said, you get rid of the abusers, but that's not just the problem, it's the people who allow it. The people who continue to stay at the university, like the athletic directors or the chancellors that continue to allow this abuse, and they're not held accountable, then that's not okay, and that's where things need to change, which is why I agree with Ramoji in implementing a system that can hold those people accountable, that has nothing to do with what the student athletes can bring to you, or any kind of money or anything like that. It's just like, this is right and wrong. This needs to change. And I'm just going to continue to use my voice to do so.
This is my first event speaking in front of all of you and others, but my experience as a mom and on the outside looking in and advocating for my son, talking to the athletic directors, talking to risk management, talking to the doctors, well, I'll be honest with you, the UCSD doctor, his comment to me, he asked me if I was from the Midwest. That was his concern. The athletic director, I told her I would be contacting the NCAA, and she said, oh, you can do that. They're not gonna do anything. This was a UCSD head athletic director that told me that. So I was running up against blocked walls, I guess you can say, and wasn't getting anywhere. But I found Ramogi online and called him and started. He was a great advocate to listen to me and agree that everything that I was doing was the right thing to do for my son, and actually confirmed what was happening to us is happening to a lot of athletes. So I feel the need to use my voice too to advocate for everyone, like I said. I don't think many people get the opportunity to share their story, and athletes just go on with their life and try to survive every day. And like I said, when the cheering stops, there's nobody there for them. So I am on a mission, and it is a real honor to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Patrick, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm actually, my documentary has turned into a documentary series at this point. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do the documentary series is not just because I'm beholden to the people who came to me, but also because I think the documentaries that are out there about serious subjects like this are so awful and boring, and they only preach to the choir, and they turn all these wonderful people who are complex people into just victims. And you kind of squint in these documentaries and you just see a line of crying women. That's what they all turn these people into, And I'm really good at making dumb movies, and that's what my career is based on. So what I'm trying to do is use those populist techniques of humor and style and rhythm and editing to get a wider group of people to care about this issue that I think really matters, because I think they deserve it. And I'm really blessed to have met Haley and Ramogi, and I hope to meet everyone else here, because one of the things we were talking about recently was like, you really do feel crazy. You feel like, what's going on? This is insane. Is it just me? And hearing all this, I thought maybe I would feel some kind of like, oh, okay, it's not just me, but I don't feel that. I just feel like shit, And the last thing I just want to say is I know that the abusers are like these cyclops, and these immovable things to their survivors and their victims. But I've met them and I've sat down with them and I've faced them off. I'm a little guy, I'm one of the littlest persons on this panel. And I can tell you, they are not informative. They are incredibly stupid and immoral people with a lot of money. And we can fight them and we can take them down and we can shame them. And that's what my goal is, and I think that's what all of our goal will be. I'm not doing this because it's right, I'm doing this because I'm mad.
Folks, these are champions. They've provided a foundation upon which we can build. They're raising critical awareness, moving a discussion forward, but they're also engaged in action, advocacy work. And I appreciate all of you for sharing your powerful stories, your courageousness, your strong resiliency, certainly for a system that continues to fail us. Let's give another warm round of applause for this group. Let's give a warm welcome for Camlocker Dove.
How are you all doing? Oh, that was so dry. How are you doing? Well, thank you. As was mentioned, my name is Assemblywoman Sydney. Well, my name is Sydney Camlocker Dove, and I am the Assemblywoman for the 54th Assembly District. And UCLA is in the heart of my district. So welcome both to the 54th and to this great university. You actually caught me on an off day. My staff and I were just closing out a 2-day staff retreat to talk about our legislative priorities for 2020. And so as luck would have it, you all are here having a very rich, timely, important conversation of your own. So I wanted to stop by and say hello. I do want to give a shout out to Ramogi for putting this conference together, and to the NCAA Players Association for being woke, especially as it relates to this issue. I think it's no wonder, actually, that this conversation is happening here at UCLA. After all, UCLA is the home of greats like Arthur Ashe, Ed O'Bannon, and Caitlin Otashi. They are pioneers and student activists. And we also know that UCLA is a blue blood school, part of the Power 5 conference, and that says a lot. As many of you all know, as was mentioned in my brief introduction, I was a co-sponsor or co-author to SB 206. Yes, thank you. I worked really hard to get it out of our Arts and Entertainment Committee, and in fact, our committee consultant is here today, Dana, so I want to give a shout out to the folks who come down from Sacramento to stay connected to these issues. I was also the floor jockey for the bill and got it off of the assembly floor with absolutely no votes, and so that says a lot. If you saw my floor speech, and I'm sure many of you did not because you all seem to lead really good lives, but if you saw it, you will have heard that I laid into the NCAA. I referenced Greg Anthony's story, the basketball athlete from UNLV, as an example of the double standard that persists within the NCAA and part of this industry. And I actually called the NCAA out for abiding and using pimp rules to govern its industry. I take care of you, or no one takes care of you. And SB 206 was saying we're going to put a stop to that. But I have to tell you that with the signing of SB 206 and with the fruition of similar pieces of legislation in other states, we really have to pivot away from 206 and talk about the future of amateur athleticism and what that means, what it means for students, what it means for donors, what it means for boosters, what it means for schools, what it means for the families of students, what it means for agents, what it means for an entire cottage industry that makes money off the backs of student athletes. SB 206 was a great bill. It got a lot of press. The governor signed it, on HBO with LeBron James. That was incredibly exciting. But, and you all know this better than I, the NCAA has been at this for a while. And so it knows how to strategically pivot in order to keep its interests alive. And that's not a shock. It's understandable. It is reality. But that doesn't mean that it's the end. In fact, I see the signing of SB 206 as a departure to have different kinds of conversations about how we protect our students, about how we protect the rights, the health, and the safety of our student athletes. It will allow us to have conversations about how student athletes are treated, those that have scholarships that come from the NCAA and those that don't. And it will allow us to have conversations about enforcement, because you can have as many bills and laws on the books as possible. And if you don't have an enforcement arm, they are as good as the paper that they are written on. And ultimately, I hope this will allow us to have a conversation about something that I believe to be true, which is that students and student athletes are not property. They are not the property of a school. They are not the property of institutions. And you know better than I that student athletes with or without scholarships are doing all they can and then some to stay in school and to also do their job, and it is a job, being a student athlete. And you deserve that acknowledgement and the support and the protection that should come with it. And you also should be emancipated from being considered a school's property that may feel like it has the right to own all that you are and all of your assets, which are your skills. I am in the business of social justice and equity, and my passion lies in the work that I do on my public safety committee and as chair of the Select Committee on Incarcerated Women. I fight very strongly to talk about injustices, to talk about transparency, to talk about equity. And while we don't really hear those words when we're talking about sports and athleticism, because quite frankly, when you're talking about sports, you're usually talking about the elite athletes who are making tons of money and get all of the endorsements and the profiles, and no one wants to suggest that they're victims or that they're being taken advantage of. But those are the shiny objects, I think, that allow us to deflect with ease true conversations that we should be having about how our student athletes are treated and the expectations that come with playing a sport for a school. So I am certainly not as sexy or as famous as Dwayne Johnson, but I will say that I have been binge watching Ballers while I've been on interim because I have insomnia. And I was really struck by, and while maybe superficial and fun, but the number of injustices that bubble up in that series and are really uncovered when you're talking about the state of affairs with a multi-trillion-dollar, billion-dollar sports industry that is based primarily on the backs of people. And how, if we're not going to put an end to it, that we recognize it for what it is and allow some justices to come to light. I think when we're talking about that, you have to reference the play that happened at Northwestern University with trying to unionize the players. I think when you're talking about that, you have to reference the documentary At the Heart of Gold that made transparent the abuses and the assaults that happened to women gymnasts. I think at the heart of that, you have to talk of the dark underbelly that is part of amateur sports and how we as legislators stand with you to unravel and reveal some of these injustices and do right by you through legislation and through policy enforcement. So I am really here to congratulate you all for convening this. I want to thank the panelists that was here before I heard some of your your testimonies and your stories, and I want to thank you for your courage. And I hope that you will consider me your cut woman, part of your team, as we work together to continue these very critical conversations about justice, equity, protection, and safety for our student athletes in the heart of the money that governs and rules this all. So thank you so much.